besides the fact that we have multiple representation schemes for different measurements, we also have a lot of situations where something makes more sense to be measured in one unit versus another. That if I'm talking about the size of this pen here, I could measure it in terms of miles, but why would I do that? Except to be weird and difficult. Really, if I want to talk about the size of this thing, I'd use inches. By the same coin, if I want to talk about how far it is for me to get to work in the morning, I wouldn't talk about that in terms of inches unless I want to be really obtuse. I would use miles in that case. So, to go from one unit to another, we have what's called dimensional analysis, which is basically just a fancy math and science term for unit conversion. Where what we do is we multiply by the fractional value that exchanges between the two units. So if we want to go from, say, feet to inches, we recognize that we have 12 inches per foot. So you'd multiply by 12 to get it into those new units. And if you want to go the other way, you'd divide by 12 with a little bit more care for how those units come into play to make sure that they cancel out properly. But I can describe this all I want. It's very much easier to see how this works with some examples, and we're going to be getting a lot of examples of this process through this chapter, so get used to seeing some fractions. For our first example, we want to use dimensional analysis to convert 90 inches to yards and 4.2 miles to feet. For that first case, what we can do there is start from recognizing that our value 90 inches can be seen in terms of yards as, well, 1/36 of a yard per inch. So we'll take that 90 inches, I'm going to abbreviate 90 in, and we're going to divide it by 1 just for the sake of having that fraction there. People like multiplying by fractions with that thing in there. It doesn't actually do anything, but it cleans up our notation just a tiny bit. And we're going to multiply this by 1 yard over 36 inches. And we're doing that because for every yard, you have 36 inches. And in this multiplication, what we will end up getting is 90 inches times yards, which sounds terrible, and it's not a very good unit. But that's going to be divided by 36 inches. And while it's a little bit different than what you're used to, even though these units, they're not quite symbols in the way that a lot of math stuff is, they still do cancel across division. That is, the inches over inches cancel. And what we'd be left with here is 90, I don't know why that 0 is so small right now, 90 yards over 36, or 90 over 36 yards if you prefer, which we can simplify down to get that value there is 2.5 yards. That 90 over 36 would be 2 with a remainder of 18. 18 over 36 is 1/2. And I'm not always going to write this middle step here in. I'll put that in there for these first couple of them so you can see it. But what's going on is we're matching up and canceling out the old units to get our new units. We always put the new units on top and the old ones on the bottom to make sure they cancel. Sometimes that means dividing out a number. Sometimes that means multiplying in a number. But the main thing we need to do is make sure that this action right there happens. That's the essential step of unit conversion, or dimensional analysis. Where for our second case, we're going to do basically the same thing. We have 4.2 miles, and we want to convert that to, in that case, feet. So, we have to think about the relationship in terms of feet. We want to convert 2 feet and miles. And I don't think I gave myself enough space, but that's okay. Where for every 1 mile, we have 5,280 feet. So we just go across this here. We'll have 4.2 times 5,280 foot miles, which, yes, is a stupid unit. That's going to be divided by 1 mile. And there's not a whole lot of division in terms of like those numbers, but there is nice division in terms of the units, because the miles are going to cancel, and we'll be left with 4.2 times 5280 feet, or, if you prefer, and most would, 22,176 feet. Now, the reasons why we convert might vary from thing to thing. If you're talking about the space in a garden, it might be more useful, that's 2.5 yards of space rather than 90 inches. It's about 2 paces if you need that sort of understanding. Or for something like this, if you're looking at, say, the height of a mountain, most people like measuring that in terms of feet rather than miles. So you might say that's 22,000 feet instead of 4.2 miles. It's all a matter of context and what it is that you might actually be looking for, what it is you might want to measure. Where the nice thing about the imperial system that we're looking at here, the English system, is you can get at least some sense of what's going on just by thinking in terms of basic units, basic everyday objects, that when you're looking at 2.5 yards, it's about 2.5 steps. When you're looking at 22,000 feet, that's 22,000 of each foot. You can almost picture that, even though it's probably too big of a number to really comprehend. But it's not so great for incredibly precise things. So, what we'll talk about next is a somewhat more precise system called the metric system.